Hey guys, tonight we drift away from the hum of modern life and step back thousands of years to a place where a single river quietly rules everything around it. Picture this, it's pre-dawn and you're standing barefoot on cool, damp earth. The air smells faintly of wet reeds and distant wood smoke. A gentle breeze ripples across the dark water beside you, the Nile River. There's a rhythmic lapping against the banks, like the planet itself is breathing in its sleep. The world hasn't woken yet, but the river already knows its role. Every year, like clockwork, it swells, spills over its edges, and leaves behind the gift, rich, dark silt. Without it, nothing grows. Without it, well, you probably wouldn't survive the season. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The stars above you are slowly fading into the soft blush of dawn. You're standing on the western bank of the Nile, somewhere between Memphis and Thebes. It's around 2500 BCE, give or take a dynasty. You look out over a broad floodplain that has, for weeks, been underwater. The inundation has reached its peak. The floodwater stretches out like a massive mirror, broken only that patches of papyrus and the occasional canoe gliding silently through the early morning mist. You pull your linen shawl a little closer. The air is surprisingly cool before sunrise, and you can hear frogs croaking in the shallows. It's a strange moment of calm in a year defined by rhythms older than pyramids. The Nile doesn't ask permission, it simply rises each year between June and September, fed by distant rains in the Ethiopian highlands. By the time it reaches you, the flood feels both inevitable and personal. You take a step forward and your foot sinks into soft, wet soil. It's slippery but comforting, like stepping into freshly mixed clay. This is the annual gift, nutrient-rich black silt called kemet, which literally gives Egypt its ancient name, the Black Land. It's so fertile that early Greek travelers later wrote about Egypt as a miracle, farmland appearing in the middle of a desert, like some sort of divine gardening trick. Across the riverbank, you see a group of farmers, your neighbors, checking wooden measuring posts that poke up from the water. These posts, known as nilometers, track how high the flood has reached. The markings are simple but crucial. Too low and everyone worries about famine. Too high and you get drowned fields and destroyed homes. Historians still argue whether local officials or temple priests controlled these measurements more strictly, but either way, someone is definitely going to write down the results on a papyrus scroll before breakfast. As the light strengthens, you notice little details coming alive. The way tiny snails cling to reeds, the glint of fish flicking near the surface, and the lines of silt forming delicate patterns along the receding edges. The river's behavior this year has been generous. The flood wasn't too high and not too low. It's what modern hydrologists might call optimal agricultural conditions, though no one here has that vocabulary yet. They just call it blessed. You tilt your head back and watch a lone ibis glide overhead, white wings glowing pink in the sunrise. To the ancient Egyptians, the ibis is sacred to Thoth, god of wisdom. You can almost imagine Thoth hovering above with a notepad, calmly taking attendance of all the fields that will soon burst with grain. And honestly, with the precision these floods arrive, you wouldn't be too surprised if he did. Downriver, the temple complex is already stirring. A line of workers carries offerings toward a small shrine. You can smell burning incense mixing with the fresh, muddy scent of the floodplain. It's a subtle reminder that farming here isn't just a job, it's a partnership with forces far bigger than you. If the Nile performs, you eat. If it doesn't, well, let's just say you start getting very creative with dried fish and wild plants. You turn to look westward. Beyond the fertile strip lies the desert, endless beige dunes under the rising sun. The contrast is startling. One side is life, the other is silence. The desert, called Deshret, the Red Land, wasn't just a backdrop. It framed the entire worldview. Without the desert's boundaries, the floods would have no edge, and the civilization no shape. You can see why people built their tombs and monuments there, away from the fertile chaos in the dry, unchanging sands. It's the ultimate ancient real estate strategy: plant in the black land, rest in the red. Someone nearby cracks a sleepy joke about how if the flood had been any lower, they'd be sowing seeds on cracked mud and prayers alone. You chuckle. Even in 2500 BCE, gallows humor exists. The farmers here have lived through high floods that swept away granaries and low floods that starved villages. A good year is celebrated quietly, almost reverently, because everyone knows it's a gift, not a guarantee. You kneel and pick up a handful of silt. It's dark, almost black, with a silky texture that sticks to your fingers. This stuff is loaded with minerals, iron, magnesium, organic matter, all carried hundreds of kilometers from the Ethiopian plateau. It's like nature's delivery service, centuries before express shipping. A quirky tidbit? Some early texts suggest farmers believed tiny sparrows lived in the silt, helping plants grow. Whether that's literal belief or poetic shorthand is anyone's guess, but it shows how intertwined nature and spirituality are here. As the morning brightens, activity increases. Families emerge from mud brick houses along the riverbank, children chasing each other while goats bleat impatiently. Men adjust reed mats on small boats, preparing to inspect which parts of their land are ready to reclaim from the flood. Women grind the leftover grain for breakfast porridge, their rhythmic motions echoing through the still air. There's no sharp division between home and field. The river flows through every part of daily life. You catch the faint sound of a priest's chant from a nearby temple, thanking Hapi, the god of the inundation, for another successful flood. Hapi is usually depicted as a plump, content figure with water lilies and offerings. He isn't a god of thunder or war, he's the quiet provider, the one who fills the fields and granaries. Honestly, if gods had day jobs, Hapi would be the reliable postal worker, making sure everyone gets their seasonal package. Historians still debate exactly how much control the central government had over individual farms during this period. Some argue that the pharaoh's administration carefully allocated land and labor, keeping meticulous records on papyrus. Others think local communities operated more autonomously, with temples playing a coordinating role. You don't need to pick a side though. You just need to get your hands dirty once the water recedes. The sun is now fully above the horizon. The mist has lifted, revealing the full breadth of the fertile floodplain. Soon, workers will start marking boundaries with simple rope grids to determine which fields belong to whom this year. Because when a flood covers everything, property lines get, let's say, a little flexible. Ancient Egyptian surveyors, known as harpedonopte, literally rope stretchers, will walk the fields to redraw boundaries, a job so precise that some modern mathematicians credit them with influencing early geometry. A dragonfly lands briefly on your arm before zipping away toward the water. You watch it for a moment, realizing that this calm is temporary. In just a few weeks, this serene mirror of water will turn into bustling farmland, planted, irrigated, and alive with labor. But for now, it's peaceful. The Nile has done its part. It's your turn next. The breeze softens, the croaking fades, and the rhythmic pulse of the river continues, steady, ancient, indifferent, yet generous. Standing here on the edge of the water, you feel connected to something vast and old. This is the beginning of the agricultural year, and your story has just stepped into the fertile mud. The sun has climbed a little higher now, warming the damp ground under your feet. The once submerged fields are slowly re-emerging, glistening in patches where the water has begun to drain away. You can almost hear the land sigh in relief, as if it's been holding its breath through the entire flood season. The real work is about to begin. You walk along a narrow ridge of packed mud that separates two plots. It's uneven, slippery in places, but it's familiar, like the same shortcut you've been taking since childhood. Around you, neighbors are emerging too, carrying bundles of tools, wooden hoes, baskets, reed markers. There's a quiet hum in the air, not the frantic buzz of harvest time, but the steady, deliberate energy of preparation. The first task is to decide exactly where your field begins and ends this year, because when the Nile floods, it erases everything: fences, markers, and boundaries. Once the waters retreat, the floodplain is a blank canvas again. And that means a kind of ancient annual real estate negotiation is about to unfold. You stop near a group of harpedonopterae, the rope stretchers. They're a small but vital crew of surveyors, each carrying a coiled rope carefully marked with knots at regular intervals. These knots are their rulers, their units of measure. You watch as they stretch the rope between two wooden stakes, pull it taut, then mark a straight line across the muddy ground. Their movements are precise and practiced, like musicians tuning their instruments. This surveying process is more than just neighborly courtesy. It's an early example of geometry at work. The ancient Egyptians were so good at measuring and dividing land that later Greek mathematicians, including Herodotus and possibly even Pythagoras, credited them with inspiring mathematical principles. You don't think about that, of course. You just know that if they mark your boundary incorrectly, you'll spend the rest of the year arguing with the family next door about whose wheat is whose. As the rope stretchers finish one line, they move on to the next, leaving behind a neat grid of straight, mud-marked plots. It's strangely satisfying to see order emerge from what, only days ago, was a flooded plain. The morning light catches the wet silt, making it gleam like polished bronze. You pause to watch a small argument break out a few plots away. Two neighbors are gesturing animatedly at a boundary marker that seems suspiciously shifted. One claims the flood washed it closer to his house. The other insists it was always that way. A surveyor steps in, measuring again with calm authority. The rope doesn't lie, even when tempers do. Historians still argue whether this entire land division process was centrally managed by the pharaoh's administration or left mostly to local village councils. Some evidence, like taxation records and temple archives, suggests a surprisingly sophisticated bureaucracy. Others believe that, on the ground, communities handled most of the practical decisions themselves, with temple officials merely keeping an eye on things. Either way, standing here with your feet in the mud, the system feels surprisingly organized for a civilization without modern machines. Once your plot is measured and marked, it's time to prepare the land. You bend down and push your hand through the top layer of soil. It's still damp and cool, but firm enough to hold shape. This is the sweet spot, the moment when the floodwater has retreated just enough to allow work without the ground turning into quicksand. The family gathers. Someone brings a pair of sturdy oxen with a wooden plow, their horns wrapped in woven rope to prevent injury. The plow isn't elaborate, just a sharpened wooden blade attached to a beam, but it's effective. As the oxen move forward, the plow cuts neat furrows into the softened earth. You follow behind, occasionally breaking up clumps with a hoe. The smell of freshly turned silt rises like a gentle perfume. It's sweaty, muddy work, but it's strangely meditative. The rhythmic creak of the wooden yoke, the steady snorting of the oxen, the squelch of your feet in the field, it all blends into a kind of slow, hypnotic soundtrack. You catch yourself humming a little tune, something your grandmother used to sing during planting season. A quirky little detail, some households place small figurines of protective deities at the corners of their fields during this stage. They're usually made of clay, sometimes a little crocodile, sometimes a dwarf-like figure representing Bes, the household protector. It's part good luck charm, part silent scarecrow. You place yours at the north corner of the field, facing the Nile like a tiny guardian staring down the horizon. As the day warms, workers from nearby plots begin to form lines to help each other level the land. They drag wide wooden boards across the soil to smooth it out, ensuring the irrigation water will flow evenly later. There's a lot of joking back and forth. Someone slips in the mud and pretends it was intentional. Another loudly claims their field is so flat the gods could play Senate on it. Your plot is almost ready now. You look around and notice the landscape transforming. What was once a drowned expanse is now a patchwork quilt of fields, each carefully measured and shaped. It's like watching a giant puzzle click into place, one muddy square at a time. The Nile itself is still gently flowing in the distance, but its floodwaters are mostly confined to the main channel again. Small canals remain, like veins branching out from the river, carrying residual water that will soon be redirected for irrigation. You can already see some farmers at the edges, digging shallow channels with broad hose, preparing to guide water into their fields in the weeks to come. You take a break and sit on an overturned basket, wiping sweat from your forehead with the edge of your linen tunic. A young boy trots over carrying a clay jug of water, probably from a nearby well since the floodwater is still too murky to drink. He hands it to you with a grin. You thank him, take a long sip, and feel the coolness spread through your chest. Nearby, an elder leans on his walking stick, surveying the activity. He mutters something about how the floods used to be higher and stronger in his youth. It's a classic move. Every generation thinks the past had bigger floods, taller crops, and fewer boundary disputes. You smile politely, knowing that next generation, you'll probably say the same thing. A little farther off, you catch sight of a group of temple scribes. Their shaved heads glint in the sun as they stand under a makeshift awning, carefully recording something on sheets of papyrus. They're probably noting down the boundaries for taxation or temple offerings. Grain isn't just food here, it's currency, taxes, and offerings all rolled into one. So of course, the scribes are involved early. Historians still debate how standardized these records were. Some think every plot was meticulously documented every year. Others argue that in many rural areas, the records were loose, relying more on communal memory than written archives. Either way, seeing scribes hunched over their scrolls while farmers plow the fields is a reminder that agriculture here isn't just about seeds and soil, it's about society itself. By late afternoon, the fields have taken shape. The sun is starting to dip toward the western horizon, casting long golden rays across the floodplain. You stand at the edge of your plot, looking over the neat rows of turned earth. Tomorrow, you'll start working on irrigation, shaping channels and raising water with shadoofs. But for now, this is enough. A pair of cranes land nearby, picking delicately at insects stirred up by the day's work. The air smells like wet earth and warm sun-baked mud, a scent you'll forever associate with beginnings. You glance toward the Nile one last time before heading home. Its surface reflects the fading light like a sheet of gold. The floods have withdrawn, the land is measured, the soil is ready. Everything depends on what you do next. You take a slow breath, letting the warm air fill your lungs. There's satisfaction in this moment, not the loud triumph of harvest, but the quiet assurance of preparation well done. Tomorrow, the water will rise again, but only where you guide it. The next morning, you wake to the sound of soft splashing outside your home. When you step out into the pale light, you see neighbors already ankle-deep in the edges of their fields, shoveling and scooping muddy water with quiet determination. It's irrigation day, the moment where the Nile's leftover water is coaxed, channeled, and lifted into the right places. The flood may have done the heavy lifting by blanketing the land with silt, but now it's your turn to play waterkeeper. The air is cooler in the early morning, carrying a faint mist from the river. You wade toward the edge of your field, your feet sinking slightly into the soft earth with each step. The mud squelches between your toes in a way that's both mildly unpleasant and oddly satisfying. It's the ancient Egyptian version of a spa treatment, though no one here would market it that way. Along the banks, wooden frames with dangling buckets begin to appear, shadufs. They look deceptively simple. A long pole balanced on a pivot with a heavy counterweight on one end and a bucket tied to the other. You help your neighbor lift one upright and wedge it into a sturdy base of compacted mud. When you pull the bucket end down, the counterweight smoothly lifts it back up, swinging the bucket full of water into a small channel that leads into the field. It's elegant, efficient, and doesn't require you to develop the arms of a professional wrestler. Historians still argue whether shadufs appeared in Egypt during the New Kingdom or if simpler versions existed earlier. Some inscriptions suggest early irrigation involved mostly hand-carried jars, while others show images that look suspiciously like shadufs centuries before they were officially invented. Standing here, muscles working rhythmically as you lift and lower the pole, you suspect farmers probably just figured out the smartest way to save their backs long before anyone bothered to carve it on temple walls. You settle into a rhythm. Dip, lift, swing. Dip, lift, swing. The bucket splashes water into the channel, which snakes off into the thirsty field. The water spreads across the surface in a thin layer, seeping into the turned earth like ink spreading through parchment. The sun catches the ripples, making them shimmer like molten bronze. As you work, you notice a group of children nearby splashing gleefully in one of the canals, pretending to be crocodiles. One kid makes exaggerated snapping noises, and the other scatter, squealing. You laugh under your breath. Irrigation may be serious work, but for them, it's a water park. A quirky bit of local ingenuity catches your eye. One family has rigged up a double shaduf system, where two poles work in tandem like seesaws, allowing water to be lifted in quick succession. It's surprisingly effective. You make a mental note to copy that next season, assuming the family doesn't start charging a viewing fee for their innovation. Further down the bank, two men are knee-deep in a canal, clearing out reeds and clumps of silt. Canals are like arteries. If they clog, the water can't flow where it's needed. They toss the debris onto the bank with practiced motions. The smell of wet vegetation fills the air, not unpleasant, just earthy and ancient, like a swamp that's learned good manners. You join in to help widen a section of the channel leading toward your plot. Using a flat-bladed hoe, you cut into the mud and push it aside. The water begins to flow faster, gurgling gently as it enters the narrow furrows between the rows. It's a strangely satisfying sound, like pouring a jug of cool water on a hot day. Irrigation in ancient Egypt isn't random. Fields are leveled carefully so water spreads evenly. You walk along the ridges, using your foot to block certain furrows and open others, directing the flow like a conductor guiding an orchestra. A little too much here, a little less there. It's not an exact science, but after years of practice, your instincts are sharp. Nearby, a group of women spread mats of woven reeds along the canal edges to prevent erosion. Others place small clay plugs into holes to temporarily redirect water, a low-tech but clever hydraulic system. Historians still debate how centralized irrigation management was. Some say temples coordinated water schedules, ensuring fair distribution. Others argue each community handled its own canals, negotiating access like neighbors sharing a garden hose. Looking around, you see a bit of both. Temple officials observe from shaded platforms, but it's the farmers who are knee-deep in the muck making it happen. The sun climbs higher, warming your shoulders. You pause to stretch your back and squint across the fields. The patchwork of channels and furrows looks almost like a woven mat itself, water glittering in narrow lines. In the distance, a scribe under a small canopy is jotting something onto a papyrus scroll, probably noting water usage for future taxation, because even 4,000 years ago, someone's always keeping receipts. You return to the shaduf and resume your rhythm. Dip, lift, swing. The creak of wood, the splash of water, the squelch of mud, it's repetitive but strangely calming. Your arms start to ache, but in a satisfying, honest way. A sudden splash draws your attention. A small fish, swept in from the Nile, has wriggled into one of your irrigation channels. You watch it dart through the shallow water like a silver arrow. It's harmless, and if anything, might even help keep mosquitoes down. You leave it be. Who knows, maybe it'll become the unofficial mascot of your field. By midday, the fields are thoroughly soaked. You sit under a small patch of shade cast by a leaning date palm, eating a simple lunch of bread, onions, and a wedge of cheese. Someone passes around a clay jar of lightly fermented beer, cloudy and sour but refreshing. The breeze carries the faint scent of blooming lotus from a nearby pond. It's a sensory cocktail of mud, grain, and river, all the ingredients of Egyptian life. We hear over a conversation between two older farmers nearby. They're debating whether this year's irrigation channels should be extended closer to the desert edge to reclaim more land. One argues it's possible with enough shadoofs. The other warns about overextending and losing water pressure. It's the same debate that's probably been happening every season for centuries. Historians still argue similar points when reconstructing ancient irrigation systems. Were the Egyptians expanding constantly, or did they prefer to maintain stable, known fields? No one agrees completely, not then and not now. In the afternoon, you and your neighbors perform one last check. You walk along the edges, sealing any leaks with handfuls of mud, smoothing out uneven patches, and removing stray sticks that could block the flow. It's a bit like fine-tuning a musical instrument after a rehearsal. Somewhere nearby, a worker starts singing a rhythmic song to keep time with his shadoof movements. Others join in, creating a soft chorus that drifts across the fields. The melody is simple, repetitive, and oddly hypnotic. You find yourself humming along without realizing it. A quirky superstition floats through the group. If you spill too much water outside your plot, Hoppy might borrow some of your next flood to even things out. No one truly believes it, probably, but everyone still works a little more carefully after hearing it. As the sun begins to sink toward the western horizon, the light turns golden, reflecting off the water-filled furrows like lines of liquid fire. The air cools slightly, and the frenetic pace of the day slows. You stand at the edge of your now well-irrigated field and take in the view. The Nile is still visible in the distance, wide and steady. But here, in this patch of carefully managed land, the water has become yours to control, at least for now. Your arms ache, your feet are caked in mud, and your tunic is damp and streaked with silt. But your field glistens in the fading light, neatly irrigated and ready for planting. You think back to that first moment when the floodwaters covered everything, and you can't help but marvel at how quickly chaos has been shaped into order. The chorus of frogs begins as twilight approaches, blending with the gentle trickle of residual water. Somewhere far off, a temple gong sounds, marking the end of the working day. You wipe your hands on your tunic, stretch your tired muscles, and make your way back home, leaving behind the sound of water slowly sinking into the earth. Tomorrow, you'll start sowing. Tonight, you rest with the quiet satisfaction of a day spent coaxing life from the river's gift. The sun creeps over the horizon like a patient observer, casting long shadows across the damp, freshly irrigated fields. The air is crisp, with just enough morning chill to make you pull your linen shawl a little tighter. You stand at the edge of your plot, a woven basket slung over your shoulder, filled with seeds. Today is sowing day, the quiet beginning of everything. The fields are soft beneath your feet, still holding the moisture from yesterday's careful irrigation. A faint mist hovers just above the ground, and as you walk through it, tiny droplets cling to your skin. The birds have beaten you to the fields. A handful of egrets and cranes are already picking delicately through the furrows, looking for worms and insects stirred up by the water. You give them a gentle shooing wave, but they're not really bothering anyone, they're just doing their morning shift. The basket on your shoulder is filled mostly with emmer wheat and barley, the twin pillars of Egyptian agriculture. Emmer wheat is hardy and well suited to the unpredictable floods, while barley matures faster and provides a safety net if something goes wrong with the wheat. These grains aren't just crops, they're currency, taxes, offerings, and daily bread rolled into one. In a way, you're not just sowing seeds, you're sowing your year's fate. You reach into the basket and grab a handful of seeds, feeling their rough, dry texture against your palm. With a slow, practiced motion, you begin scattering them across the furrows, your hand sweeping in a wide arc. The seeds fly through the air and settle into the damp silt with soft, almost inaudible thuds. The rhythm is instinctive. Throw, step, breathe, throw. The early morning silence makes the whole act feel ceremonial, even though it's just another part of farm life. Some families sing softly while sowing, not because anyone's watching, but because it keeps the rhythm steady. You hum a simple tune your mother taught you, a kind of half song, half prayer, asking the earth to be generous. The words are old, probably older than any temple nearby. They've been whispered over these fields for generations. Historians still argue over how organized sowing practices were. Some suggest fields were planted communally under supervision, like a state-managed operation. Others argue each family sowed their own land at their own pace, guided by experience and the Nile's timing rather than a central decree. Judging by the scene around you, it's definitely more communal than solitary. Neighbors move in quiet coordination, occasionally exchanging jokes or advice, but no one's holding a clipboard or blowing a whistle. As you move along the rows, you glance down occasionally to check how evenly the seeds are scattered. Too sparse, and the field won't yield enough. Too dense, and the plants will fight each other for nutrients. It's a delicate balance, the kind you learn not from scrolls or temple lectures, but from squinting at soil for decades. A quirky local trick involves mixing crushed, dried herbs with the seeds before scattering them. Supposedly, the smell deters birds from stealing too many, and maybe even confuses mischievous spirits who might try to borrow some of the harvest for themselves. Whether it works or not is anyone's guess, but you toss in a pinch anyway. A little superstition never hurts. The sun climbs higher, warming your back as you work your way steadily down the field. You pause every now and then to rake a thin layer of silt over the scattered seeds with a simple wooden tool. This isn't deep plowing. The flood and irrigation have already softened the earth, but just enough to tuck the seeds into a protective blanket, safe from birds and drying winds. A boy from the neighboring field walks past carrying a small clay pot of beer for his father. He grins and shouts something about racing to see whose wheat grows taller. You grin back and jokingly warn him that your field has extra special crocodile blessings this year, so they don't stand a chance. He laughs, splashes a little beer into the soil for the gods, and trots off. You look up for a moment, and the entire floodplain seems alive. Everywhere you glance, people are sowing, scattering, raking, singing. It's like a quiet choreography repeated endlessly through millennia. No drums, no trumpets, just the whisper of seeds hitting silt and the soft rustle of linen tunics in the breeze. Over by the temple's land, a group of workers is sowing in tighter formation, supervised by a priest who's muttering prayers as they go. Temple fields are often larger and more carefully tended, since their harvest supports not just priests, but also festivals, rituals, and offerings to the gods. Grain stored in temple granaries doesn't just feed people, it feeds divine bureaucracy. Historians still debate how much of Egypt's farmland was owned by temples versus private families. Some records suggest temples held enormous tracts, run almost like corporations, while others point out that small family plots remained the backbone of the system. Standing here, knee-deep in mud with a basket of seeds, you don't think much about economic theory. You just know everyone has to sow when the time is right, whether they wear priestly robes or simple loincloths. The morning passes steadily. Your hands are dusty with grain chaff, your feet slick with mud, and a light sweat clings to your skin. The air smells like wet earth, warm straw, and faint traces of lotus carried from the river. Somewhere nearby, a group of children is chasing each other with handfuls of leftover seeds, which you pretend not to see. Better they throw them at each other than into your newly planted furrows. A sudden gust of wind picks up, swirling a few seeds into the air like tiny golden flecks. You watch them dance against the bright sky for a moment before they settle back to earth. It's a small, beautiful reminder that farming is always part intention, part luck. By midday, the fields are fully sown. You step back and look at the expanse of freshly planted earth. It doesn't look like much, just a soft brown surface dotted with the faintest hints of seed. But you know what's beneath. Life is hidden there, waiting for sun and water to coax it upward. You gather up the empty basket, now feather-light, and sling it over your shoulder. A few stray grains cling to the woven reeds, and you brush them off with your hand, watching them fall into the soil like tiny promises. Before heading home, you perform one last small ritual, something your family has done for as long as anyone remembers. You take a pinch of seeds and toss them into the Nile, whispering a short prayer to Hapi and Osiris. Some say the river carries the message upstream to the gods. Others say it's just good manners to thank the source before expecting a reward. Either way, the seeds disappear into the gentle current with a soft plop. As you walk back through the furrows, the cranes and egrets return behind you, pecking at the soil in your wake. You don't mind. They'll get their share, as they always do. Farming here isn't about total control. It's a conversation between humans, river, soil, and sky. You plant, they nibble, the Nile floods, the sun warms, and somewhere in between, life happens. By the time you reach the ridge at the edge of your field, the sun is high, the mist is gone, and the sown earth stretches out like a quiet, waiting canvas. There's no instant payoff here, no dramatic drum roll, just seeds, soil, and time. Tomorrow will bring weeds, ducks, and the first signs of green. For now, you head home with tired shoulders and muddy feet, knowing that under that warm Egyptian sun, your future has just been scattered across the ground, one handful at a time. The days after sowing settle into a steady rhythm. The floodwaters have fully retreated now, leaving behind a fertile carpet of damp, dark silt. You wake before the sun most mornings, slipping quietly from your house while the air is still cool, and the village is wrapped in that soft, drowsy hush that lingers before the world begins to stir. As you step onto the fields, you notice something new each day. Tiny green shoots breaking through the soil like timid whispers. They're fragile now, almost translucent in the early light, but they're alive, and that alone is reason to breathe a little deeper. The Nile has done its part. The seeds have accepted their new home, and now the work shifts to protecting and nurturing them. It's not glamorous work, not like the dramatic flood season or the joyful harvest. This is the quiet middle, the phase that demands patience, vigilance, and the willingness to get your hands dirty over and over again. You kneel down and run your fingers gently over a patch of young barley shoots. They bend under your touch and spring back like tiny bows. But between the neat lines of sprouts, trouble is already brewing. Weeds. They sprout as eagerly as your carefully sown crops, pushing through the mud with a stubbornness that seems almost personal. Some are feathery and delicate, others thick-stemmed and wiry. They all have the same goal, to steal the moisture and nutrients meant for your wheat and barley. If you let them get ahead, your harvest will suffer. So you begin the daily ritual of weeding, a quiet, methodical task that fills the mornings. With a small hand hoe made of wood and copper, you move slowly down each row, loosening the soil, tugging weeds out by the roots, and piling them along the edges. The sun rises as you work, burning off the early mist and warming your back. You're not alone out here. All across the floodplain, families are bent over their fields, their shapes silhouetted against the rising light. You hear low voices carrying over the flat land, snatches of conversation, laughter, the occasional shout when someone uncovers a stubborn root. Sometimes whole families work side by side. Parents weeding, children running ahead to chase birds, grandparents sitting nearby, offering advice, and the occasional story from seasons past. Farming is labor, but it's also community. Speaking of birds, they are your second daily battle. Ducks, geese, ibises, and even cheeky sparrows descend on the fields in small flocks, pecking eagerly at the tender shoots. Some are wild, others belong to neighbors who let their flocks graze too close to the border of your land. Either way, they see your fields as their breakfast buffet. To keep them at bay, you've set up simple scare devices. Wooden poles with fluttering scraps of linen, clay rattles that clink softly in the wind, and a few strategically placed mud figures shaped like people. They're not perfect, but they help. Still, nothing works quite as well as a sharp clap of your hands and a loud shh as you stride down the rows. The birds scatter, wings flapping, but you know they'll be back within the hour. It's a never-ending game of patience and persistence. Sometimes, children from the village are sent into the fields as bird scarers. They spend the day perched on raised platforms made of reeds, shouting and waving to keep flocks away. They treat it like a game, inventing songs and challenges to keep from getting bored. You smile when you see them, barefoot, sun-browned, their laughter ringing across the plain. Beyond weeds and birds, insects also play their part. Locusts are the greatest fear, though they're rare in a good year. Smaller pests, like beetles and worms, can nibble at young plants, but generations of farmers have learned subtle ways to keep them in check. You scatter crushed herbs along the rows and encourage ducks to forage at the edges, letting them feast on bugs rather than sprouts. The days lengthen, and the sun grows stronger. Around midday, the heat shimmers visibly over the fields, and the work slows to a crawl. You take shelter beneath a simple reed canopy, drink water from a clay jar, and chew a bit of bread dipped in oil. You watch the fields in their stillness, young green shoots stretching toward the sky like a living carpet. It's during these quiet midday pauses that conversations about weather and omens happen. A neighbor approaches and points to a line of high, thin clouds drifting eastward. A good sign, he says, means steady winds, steady growth. Someone else mentioned seeing a heron nesting early this year, another omen of good floods next season. Whether these signs are real or imagined doesn't really matter. They're part of the rhythm, part of the way people make sense of a world they can't fully control. As weeks pass, your routine becomes almost meditative. Weed, water, chase birds, rest, repeat. You learn to spot subtle changes, the way the color of the leaves deepens when they're thriving, the faint smell of rot when water has pooled too long in one corner. You patch small irrigation channels where the silt has caved in and adjust the flow of water so every row gets its share. Irrigation remains critical during this period. The Nile's floodwaters have receded, but the fields still rely on canals and shadoofs to bring in extra moisture when needed. You and your neighbors coordinate the use of shared channels, sometimes arguing over whose turn it is to draw water. But these disputes are usually settled quickly. Everyone knows the fields must come first. Occasionally, a day brings unexpected challenges. One afternoon, a neighbor's goats escape and wander into the fields, trampling seedlings before you chase them away with loud shouts. Another day, a sudden windstorm whips through, snapping a few tender stalks and scattering your scare devices. You gather them back up, straighten the poles, and remind yourself that farming is never free of surprises. But there are rewards too. About 3 weeks after sowing, you wake to find the fields transformed. The shoots are no longer timid whispers, they're bold, bright green, and reaching knee-high. When the morning breeze blows, the entire floodplain ripples like a giant living quilt. You walk through it slowly, feeling the stalks brush against your legs. The weeds are mostly under control, the birds are fewer, and the plants stand strong. You can almost imagine the future harvest already. Golden heads of grain swaying in the sun, granaries filled to the brim, bread baking in ovens. Still, you don't relax completely. You know too well how fickle the Nile can be. A sudden drought, a pest swarm, or a late-season flood can undo weeks of effort. So you keep weeding, keep watching, keep tending. Some evenings, as the sun sets and paints the fields in soft orange light, you stay a little longer than necessary. You sit on the ridge with your feet dangling into the furrows, watching ducks glide along the irrigation channels. The day's noise fades, replaced by the chirp of crickets and the gentle gurgle of water. It's in these moments that the weight of your work settles in, not as a burden, but as a quiet pride. This is what sustains life here. Not grand battles, not royal decrees, but the daily persistence of countless hands pulling weeds, scaring birds, tending canals. It's work that rarely makes it into temple inscriptions or royal chronicles, but without it, no kingdom, no pyramid, no priesthood could survive. And so, as the stars begin to prick the sky, you rise, brush the dirt from your hands, and head home. Tomorrow, the ducks will return. The weeds will grow again, but you'll be there waiting. The weeks pass, and the gentle green of the fields deepens into a rich, almost luminous hue. The stalks sway with quiet confidence now, whispering to each other as the wind glides over the floodplain. By the time the season edges toward harvest, the landscape has transformed completely. What was once slick mud has become a dense, undulating sea of wheat and barley, Egypt's beating agricultural heart. Early one morning, before the sun climbs high, you stand at the edge of the fields and take in the sight. The barley has ripened first, its stalks shorter and sturdier, with fat golden heads that nod lazily. Emmer wheat follows close behind, taller and more delicate, shimmering faintly in the dawnlight. These two humble grains don't just feed families, they are currency, status, and survival rolled into one. Harvest time isn't a day, it's a season, a slow, careful process that stretches for weeks. There's no machine to hurry things along, just sickles, hands, baskets, and a lot of patience. Your sickle is made of wood, its curved edge lined with sharp flint teeth that catch the morning light. It's not fancy, but it works, and the rhythm of cutting becomes almost hypnotic once you settle into it. You bend low, grasp a bundle of stalks near the base, and slice cleanly. The cut stalks fall with a soft, papery sound, like dry reeds rustling. You bundle them with strips of flax and prop them upright in small shocks, so the heads can continue drying in the sun. Around you, the fields come alive with the sound of many hands at work, voices calling, children laughing, sickles swishing in rhythmic chorus. Harvest is communal. Families, neighbors, and hired hands all work together, often in exchange for a share of the grain. Songs rise over the fields, simple melodies that help keep the pace and lighten the labor. Some are old hymns to Hapi, the Nile god, thanking him for the life-giving flood. Others are cheeky work songs with playful lines about lazy farmers or greedy ducks. By midday, the sun grows fierce, and you pause to drink cool water stored in porous clay jars that sweat moisture, keeping the contents chilled. You wipe the sweat from your brow and look at the growing piles of bundled grain. It's satisfying, seeing weeks of careful tending take tangible shape. Once the cutting is done, threshing begins. You carry the bundles to a nearby threshing floor, an open, flat space hardened by years of trampling feet and hooves. Here, the stalks are spread out in a wide circle. Oxen, sometimes donkeys, are led around and around, dragging sledges fitted with stone blades that crack the husks and free the grains. You guide the animals slowly, speaking softly to keep them calm as they tread. The air fills with a dry, dusty scent of grain and chaff. Threshing is followed by winnowing, a surprisingly elegant task. You scoop up the mixture of grain and chaff with large wooden forks and toss it into the air. The wind catches the lightweight chaff and carries it off in pale golden flurries, while the heavier grains fall straight back down in a soft rain. It's mesmerizing to watch. Sometimes you catch yourself slowing just to enjoy the sight of grain falling like tiny drops of sunlight. The yield varies from year to year. In a good season, a single sack of seed can return 10 or more sacks of grain. In a bad year, you might only double what you planted, enough to survive but not to thrive. This year looks promising. The flood was kind, the weeds behaved, and the ducks didn't get too bold. As you watch the growing piles of clean grain, a quiet relief settles in your chest. Once winnowed, the grain is stored in granaries, large mud brick structures shaped like rounded silos. The entrances are small and elevated, designed to keep out pests and moisture. You climb a ladder, dump basket after basket of grain into the opening, and watch it cascade down the interior walls, filling the space like sand in an hourglass. Inside, workers tamp down the grain and plaster the top with mud to seal it against air and insects. Granaries aren't just storage, they're power. In ancient Egypt, grain is the backbone of the economy. It's used to pay workers, fund temple activities, and supply the state. Scribes keep careful records, scratching symbols into clay tablets or writing on papyrus to document how much each household delivers. You see one now, a young scribe perched under a shade awning, stylus in hand, keeping tally as baskets pass by. His linen kilt is crisp, his expression serious. He doesn't swing a sickle, but in many ways, his marks on papyrus decide who owes what and who gets rewarded. Here's a mainstream historical fact. Most Egyptian workers, including those who built temples and pyramids, were paid in rations of bread and beer made from these very grains. Gold was rare, grain was real wealth. But tucked among the practical work, you also hear stories about the quirky ways people try to protect their grain. Some farmers smear entrances with crocodile fat, believing it repels pests and evil spirits. Others bury charms shaped like scarab beetles near the granary doors. One old neighbor swears that hanging a dried fish from the rafters keeps mice away, though whether it's the smell or the superstition doing the work is anyone's guess. As evening falls on the threshing floor, the air cools and the last light slants low. You sit on a basket, hands dusty, legs sore, but spirits lifted. The harvest is not just a time of labor, it's a time of gratitude. Offerings of the first grain are often taken to small shrines or temples, thanking the gods for their generosity. You imagine the priests in distant temples offering loaves of bread and jars of beer to statues of Osiris and Renenutet, the goddess of the harvest, asking for continued protection. Still, not everything about grain is certain. Historians still argue whether the centralized grain storage and distribution systems were primarily for the community's protection against famine or a method of royal control. Some say the pharaoh's granaries ensured everyone had food during lean years. Others suggest the system concentrated power in the hands of the state, making farmers dependent on royal distribution. Perhaps it was both, a mix of practicality and politics. Either way, tonight the concern is simpler. The grain is safely stored, the fields are empty, and the cycle has turned. You look back at the bare stubble left behind, glinting faintly in the moonlight, and feel a quiet satisfaction. Months of mud, weeding, watering, and duck chasing have led to this moment. The warm, dry scent of harvested grain filling the night air. Before you head home, you climb the ladder to the granary one last time. Peering inside, you see the mountain of grain piled high, smooth on top where it's been sealed. If you close your eyes, you can almost hear it settling, a slow, soft sound like sand shifting on a beach. It's a sound that promises full bellies, steady work, and the future. You take a long breath, your lungs filling with the earthy smell of grain and mud brick. This is what sustains the kingdom, Not the golden temples or the crowns on statues, but this. Pile after pile of humble wheat and barley, grown, cut, winnowed, stored. It's not glorious, but it's everything. The fields are quiet now, the grain tucked safely away in granaries, but your days remain busy. Because in ancient Egypt, grain isn't just something you store, it's something you transform. And nothing embodies that transformation better than two humble creations, bread and beer. Together, they're the heartbeat of daily life, filling bellies, fueling work, and forming the foundation of Egyptian diets from the poorest farmer to the pharaoh himself. The morning begins with the familiar smell of yeast and smoke drifting through the village. As you step outside, the air is cool, and the sun is just starting to tint the mud brick walls with pale gold. You follow the scent to a small open courtyard where women are already kneading dough on low, flat tables. Their hands move rhythmically, folding and pressing in a way that's been passed down for generations. You join in, scooping a basket of freshly ground emmer wheat flour, still warm from the grinding stones. The flour is coarse, flecked with tiny bits of bran and grit. Ancient Egyptian bread was nothing like the soft, fluffy loaves you might picture today. It was dense, hearty, and often crunchy thanks to bits of stone that slipped in during grinding. Archaeologists have found the worn teeth of mummies bearing the marks of a lifetime spent chewing on gritty bread. You smile faintly, imagining some ancient baker apologizing for a bit of extra texture. The flour is mixed with water drawn from the canal, a pinch of salt, and sometimes a starter from a previous batch, fermented dough that adds a slight tang. As you knead, the dough grows elastic under your fingers. The air fills with the soft, wet sound of hands pressing into it. Around you, chatter rises as neighbors trade gossip, discuss harvest yields, or tease each other about whose bread rises the best. Once kneaded, the dough is shaped into round or conical loaves, often decorated with finger marks or scored patterns. These aren't for beauty alone. The marks help the bread bake evenly in the mud brick ovens. You carry a tray of shaped loaves toward the communal baking area where the beehive-shaped ovens are already glowing hot from their early morning fire. Someone has been up since dawn feeding them bundles of dried reeds and dung fuel to build a steady, smoky heat. Baking bread here is a dance with fire. Loaves are slapped against the hot inner walls of the oven, sticking like naan, or placed on flat stones near the coals. The smell is immediate, rich, warm, earthy. As the crusts darken and harden, steam escapes in soft hisses. You turn the loaves carefully, watching for that perfect balance between golden brown and charred. While the bread bakes, you move to another corner of the courtyard where the beer brewing happens. And no, this isn't the frothy pint you might imagine at a modern bar. Egyptian beer was thick, porridge-like, and mildly alcoholic, more like liquid bread than a crisp drink. But it was beloved. Adults drank it daily, children sipped watered-down versions, and workers were even paid in rations of it. You start by malting barley, soaking it until it begins to sprout. Then, just as the sprouts peek out, you dry the grains in the sun. This process unlocks sugars inside the barley, which will later feed the yeast. You pound the malted grains into a coarse mash and mix it with half-baked loaves of bread that have been crumbled apart. Yes, you literally make bread to make beer, a cycle that would make any baker-brewer proud. The mash goes into large clay vats, and you pour in water while stirring with long wooden paddles. The courtyard fills with the warm, yeasty smell of fermenting grain. Someone jokes that the smell alone could make you tipsy. The mixture is left to sit for a day or two, during which wild yeasts get to work, bubbling gently at the surface. You skim off any floating bits, occasionally stir, and listen to the faint, contented fizz of fermentation. Historians still argue whether the beer was strained before drinking or consumed as is with straws. Some evidence suggests people used long reed straws to sip the liquid, leaving the grainy sludge at the bottom of the pot. Others believe the mixture was ladled into cups and swallowed whole, fiber and all. Either way, it was both nourishment and refreshment, a safe alternative to drinking raw Nile water, which carried all manner of unfriendly organisms. As the beer ferments, you check back on the bread. Loaves are pulled from the oven one by one, their crusts crackling in the morning air. You set them out on reed mats to cool, resisting the urge to tear one open immediately. Fresh bread like this doesn't need butter or jam. Its flavor is earthy, nutty, and satisfyingly simple. By midday, both bread and beer are ready. You sit in the shade with your family and neighbors, passing around a jug of freshly brewed beer. It's cloudy, warm, and surprisingly filling. A couple of sips leave a pleasant buzz, nothing too strong, just enough to soften the edges of the day. You break a loaf in half and share it with the person beside you, the crust crackling as it splits. This combination, bread in one hand, beer in the other, isn't just lunch, it's a symbol of Egyptian life. For most people, this is the core of every meal, supplemented occasionally by vegetables, fish, or meat if fortune allows. It fuels farmers in the fields, builders on temple sites, and priests in quiet courtyards alike. Here's a mainstream historical fact. Workers who built the pyramids were not slaves in chains, but skilled laborers paid in daily rations of bread and beer. These rations were so essential that strikes sometimes broke out when the beer ran late. Imagine an ancient foreman nervously explaining, "The brewery's behind schedule, I swear, the mash is almost ready." Bread also has a ritual side. Certain loaves are shaped into special forms, cones, animals, or elaborate braids, and offered to the gods in temples. Priests leave trays of fresh bread and jugs of beer before statues of deities like Osiris and Hathor, murmuring prayers for continued fertility of the land. In some temples, the leftover offerings are redistributed among the temple workers. You can almost picture a priest sneaking a warm loaf when no one's looking. Beer, too, has its mythic connections. In one famous story, the goddess Sekhmet's rampage is halted when she drinks vats of beer dyed red to look like blood. She becomes so drunk and drowsy that her destructive fury subsides. You grin, imagining a divine lioness staggering home after a night of temple brewing gone wild. There are also quirky tidbits about how people flavored their beer and bread. Some brewers added dates or figs to sweeten the mix, creating a proto-fruit beer. Bakers sometimes pressed sesame seeds or herbs into the tops of loaves. And then there were the occasional experimental batches. One old brewer in your village swears that leaving the mash under the stars for exactly 3 nights produces the most talkative beer, a poetic way of saying it gets you tipsy fast. As the day winds down, you clean the vats, sweep the ovens, and stack the leftover bread carefully. Some loaves will be stored for days, others will harden and later be soaked in beer to soften them again, a loop of sustenance. You watch as children run by with crumbs on their faces. Elders sit in the shade sipping beer slowly, and workers carry baskets of bread back to their homes. The granaries might hold the wealth of the land, but here, in the courtyards and ovens, that wealth becomes life. It's tangible, fragrant, warm in your hands. You take one last piece of bread, dip it in a bowl of honey, and savor the sweetness melting on your tongue. The hum of the village softens as the sun dips lower, and the comforting rhythm of bread and beer continues, unchanged for thousands of years. With the harvest stored and daily bread and beer flowing steadily, your world expands beyond the fields and granaries. Now, attention turns inward to the household garden, that quiet patch of cultivated earth tucked behind mud brick walls, where flavors, fragrances, and a little bit of daily magic grow side by side. The sun has barely cleared the horizon when you step into your garden. The air here feels different. Cooler, softer, shaded by palm fronds and climbing vines. A light mist still clings to the leaves, and somewhere nearby, a dove coos lazily from its perch. This isn't the wide, sun-beaten floodplain of the grain fields. It's intimate, calm, a place where your hands work as much for pleasure as for survival. The household garden in ancient Egypt is both practical and personal. Unlike the sprawling communal fields, this space is carefully arranged to make the most of scarce water. Canals and small channels divert just enough from the main irrigation system to keep everything green. You crouch beside a narrow trench and use a small wooden tool to redirect a trickle toward a row of lettuce. The water flows with a satisfying gurgle, soaking the dark soil. The first plants you check on are the vegetables. Egyptian gardens overflow with greens that thrive in the warm climate. Lettuce with soft, pale leaves, leeks standing tall like slender spears, garlic heads poking through the soil, and onions with their papery skins forming beneath the surface. You gently pull a few onions, their roots still wet, and wipe the dirt on your linen kilt. Their scent rises sharp and clean, strong enough to wake anyone lingering in bed. Lettuce, in particular, holds a special place. It's not just food, it's considered a plant of fertility, sacred to the god Men. You pluck a few tender leaves, stack them neatly in a reed basket, and smile at the thought that this humble vegetable once had a cult following. Historians still chuckle over temple reliefs that show priests carrying towering stalks of lettuce like precious offerings, as if they were golden scepters. Moving through the rows, you stop at a patch of beans and chickpeas. Their delicate flowers have given way to pods that hang like little green ornaments. Legumes are your protein when fish or meat is scarce. You pick a few pods and crack them open on the spot, popping fresh beans into your mouth with a quiet crunch. The taste is mild and slightly sweet, and for a moment, it feels like the garden itself is sharing a secret with you. Nearby, melons and cucumbers sprawl across the ground, their vines curling like lazy snakes in the morning sun. You lift a small melon and tap it with your knuckles, listening for that hollow thump that signals ripeness. It's ready. You slice it open with your copper knife, and the wave of cool, sweet fragrance rises instantly. In the heat of Egypt, biting into fresh melon is like tasting relief itself. Beyond the vegetables, there's a section of herbs and seasonings, the hidden heart of the garden. Dill, coriander, and fenugreek grow in tight clusters, their leaves delicate and feathery. You rub a few between your fingers, releasing bursts of aroma that linger in the air. Coriander seeds will later flavor bread and stews, while fenugreek adds a nutty depth to sauces. Garlic and onions, already picked, will find their way into nearly every dish, their pungency mellowed by cooking over clay hearths. You pause at a row of henna shrubs and papyrus clumps. While not food, they serve their own purposes. Henna for staining skin and hair during festivals, papyrus for writing and weaving mats. A well-tended garden isn't just about filling the stomach. It's about sustaining every aspect of daily life, from beauty to bureaucracy. Then there are the fruit trees, planted carefully to provide shade and sustenance. Date palms tower over the garden, their fronds rustling gently. High above, clusters of golden dates ripen in the sun. You climb a short ladder, shimmy up the trunk with practiced ease, and pluck a few soft, sticky fruits. The sweetness coats your fingers instantly. Dates are more than snacks. They're a source of energy, a sweetener for beer, and even offerings to the gods. Some households press them into cakes or mix them with nuts for special occasions. Nearby stands a fig tree, its wide leaves providing welcome shade. Figs are tender, delicate things. You pick one carefully, tearing it open to reveal its pink, honeycombed interior. The smell is rich, almost floral. You pop it into your mouth and savor its softness. Some families dry figs to preserve them for lean months, stringing them up in the rafters like little edible lanterns. Occasionally, the wealthier households cultivate exotic fruits imported through trade, pomegranates from the Levant, sycamore figs from distant groves. You remember the first time you tasted a pomegranate, cracking open that leathery skin to reveal jewel-like seeds inside? It felt like holding a treasure chest. These fruits are rare treats for most farmers, but in temple gardens and elite estates, they grow in abundance, tended by specialized gardeners. As the sun climbs higher, the garden hums with quiet life. Bees dart between melon blossoms, their buzzing blending with the soft gurgle of water channels. A neighbor leans over the low wall, exchanging a few cucumbers for a handful of garlic. A casual barter that keeps everyone's meals interesting. Gardens like yours are miniature marketplaces, social hubs where flavors are shared, seeds are swapped, and recipes whispered over fences. Here's a mainstream historical fact. Household gardens were essential for the Egyptian diet, often providing the majority of fresh produce and herbs. Grain might feed the masses, but gardens flavored their lives. Temples and palaces maintained vast, meticulously planned gardens as well, some with pools, exotic plants, and rows of sycamores for shade. And then, of course, there are the quirky gardening tricks people swear by. One neighbor buries fish scraps beneath melon mounds, claiming it makes them sweeter. Another insists that singing to leeks in the morning keeps them growing straight. Though whether it's the tune or the gardener's dedication that matters is anyone's guess. Some families hang bits of bright linen in the garden to keep birds away, fluttering like festive banners. As you tend the garden, you reflect on how different this labor feels compared to the fields. There, everything depends on the Nile's flood, a vast, uncontrollable force. Here, it's your hands and daily attention that matter. Miss a watering and the lettuce wilts. Forget to pick herbs and they bolt in the heat. The garden rewards care with flavor, fragrance, and the little beauty in the everyday. Historians still argue whether these gardens were managed primarily by women, by entire families together, or by specialized servants in wealthier households. Some evidence points to women as the main keepers of kitchen gardens, while temple records suggest trained gardeners tended elite plots. Whatever the case, it's clear that these spaces were vital, shaping meals, rituals, and even medicine. By midday, your basket is heavy with onions, lettuce, beans, herbs, and a few precious fruits. You carry it inside where the kitchen hearth is already glowing. Tonight's stew will be flavored with coriander and garlic, served with bread baked this morning, and followed by sweet melon slices for dessert. It's not a grand feast, but it's honest, nourishing, and delicious. As the heat peaks, you return to the garden one last time. You sit on a low stool beneath a fig tree, watching the shadows stretch. A breeze rustles through the palms, carrying with it the mixed scents of earth, herbs, and ripening fruit. The ducks waddle by, eyeing your melons suspiciously but wisely keeping their distance. For a moment, the world outside the garden fades, the pharaoh's decrees, the temple rituals, the wide stretch of the Nile. Here, it's just you, the soil, and the quiet symphony of growing things. This is where the kingdom finds its flavor, not in palace kitchens or temple storerooms, but in little gardens like yours, tended with patience and shared with neighbors. The vegetables on your table tonight will whisper stories of the morning water channels and your hands in the soil. You close your eyes and breathe it all in. The Nile may feed the nation, but the garden feeds the soul. With your basket of herbs and vegetables safely set aside for the evening stew, you turn your attention to another essential part of the ancient Egyptian table: fish and fowl. The Nile isn't just a river, it's a pantry, a marketplace, and sometimes, if you're not careful, a place where you get nipped by a particularly rude catfish. The sun hangs a little higher now, warm but not yet punishing, and the water gleams like polished bronze. You grab a woven reed net, its knots slightly frayed from use, and make your way down to the riverbank. This stretch of the Nile is quiet. Papyrus reeds sway in the breeze, and water birds stalk the shallows with the focus of seasoned hunters. A few neighbors are already there, knee-deep in the shallows, tossing nets or spearing fish with elegant wooden harpoons. Fishing is more than just a chore. It's a rhythm, a kind of moving meditation. You wade in until the water reaches your calves, cool and silty. You cast a net wide with a practiced flick, letting it settle gently onto the surface before it sinks. The weight pulls against your hands as the net traps whatever unlucky fish happen to swim too close. You wait a moment, feeling the subtle vibrations through the rope, then slowly haul it back toward shore. When the net breaks the surface, it wriggles with life. A few tilapia, one long and slippery catfish, and something small and silvery that darts like liquid light. Tilapia is the everyday catch, mild, versatile, and beloved. Catfish, with its whiskered face, has a stronger flavor and a bit of a reputation. Some Egyptians consider it unclean because it feeds off the riverbed, but others don't mind at all. You, for one, are happy to toss it into tonight's stew. Here's a mainstream historical fact. The Nile teemed with fish, and fishing was a vital part of the Egyptian diet, especially for the working classes. Frescoes from tombs depict scenes almost identical to what you're doing now. Nets cast, fish flopping, and fishermen smiling proudly. Fish wasn't just eaten fresh, it was salted, dried, or smoked for preservation, allowing families to store it for leaner times. You set your catch in a woven basket shaded by palm fronds and head toward a small dock, where fishing boats bob gently. Some are little more than bundles of papyrus bound together, light enough to push with a pole. Others are sturdier wooden boats, used for setting larger nets or venturing farther into the river's deeper currents. You climb onto one with a friend, the two of you paddling slowly to a shaded cove where fish like to gather. Out here, away from the shore's chatter, the Nile feels vast. The breeze smells of water, mud, and reeds. You lower a line baited with bits of leftover bread and wait. It's quiet, except for the occasional splash and the creak of the boat. You lean back, letting the sun warm your face. Fishing, you realize, is one of the few tasks that gives you a good excuse to sit still for a while. Before long, you feel a tug. You pull steadily and bring up a plump tilapia, scales flashing in the light. You drop it into the basket with its friends and smile. That'll do nicely. Once the morning's fishing is done, your attention shifts to fowl, not the fancy kind found in palace feasts, but the geese, ducks, and birds that make their homes along the riverbanks and in the marshes. Ancient Egyptians were clever when it came to catching birds. Some used nets strung between poles, waiting for flocks to fly through. Others used decoys, wooden birds painted realistically and placed on the water to lure in unsuspecting flocks. You join a small group heading into the reeds. The ground here squelches beneath your sandals, and the air is alive with chirps and honks. One friend raises a throwing stick, curved and balanced, almost like a boomerang, and takes aim at a pair of ducks waddling nearby. With a swift throw, the stick arcs gracefully and knocks one duck into the shallows. Another friend quickly gathers it up. It's not glamorous work, but it's efficient. For a quirky historical tidbit, some wealthier Egyptians kept domesticated geese and even force-fed them to produce larger, fattier birds for elite tables, an ancient precursor to foie gras. Meanwhile, farmers often kept a few ducks or pigeons at home, feeding them kitchen scraps and letting them roam. Their eggs provided extra protein, and their occasional appearance in the stew pots was a welcome treat. You haul today's feathered bounty back home. A pair of ducks, a goose, and the modest pile of fish. The kitchen courtyard bustles with activity. Someone is gutting fish, someone else plucking feathers, and the child is carefully turning a grinding stone to make spice pastes. The air is fragrant with coriander, garlic, and the earthy scent of fresh-caught tilapia. Fish preparation varies depending on the day. Sometimes it's simply grilled over an open flame, sometimes chopped up into stews with onions and herbs, and sometimes salted heavily for preservation. You choose a mix: one tilapia grilled with coriander and garlic, one catfish salted for later, and the silvery little fish dried on racks in the sun. The ducks will be roasted slowly in clay ovens, their skin crisping beautifully. Feasts. Not royal banquets, but humble, everyday feasts shared along family and neighbors. As the day stretches into afternoon, the kitchen fills with mouth-watering smells. Clay pots bubble over low fires. Someone slices melon for dessert. Bread bakes in dome-shaped ovens, filling the air with its nutty aroma. Fish and fowl weren't daily fare for everyone. For poorer families, fish was more common than meat, while fowl appeared mostly on special occasions or festival days. Historians still argue whether large-scale poultry farming existed in the Old Kingdom or developed later in temple estates. Some evidence suggests temples maintained controlled flocks for offerings, while others believe most bird catching was seasonal and opportunistic. By evening, the courtyard transforms into a communal dining space. Mats are laid out, baskets of bread passed around, and dishes of roasted duck, grilled fish, and herb stews set in the center. You dip a piece of bread into a sauce fragrant with garlic and coriander and savor the combination of crisp duck skin, tender fish, and sweet melon. Someone tells a joke about a goose stealing a priest's lunch. Another neighbor boasts about catching a tilapia this big, stretching his arms wider than seems believable. Children chase each other between the mats, and the ducks that remain alive waddle around, eyeing their roasted cousins with what might be suspicion, or maybe just curiosity. There's laughter, soft music played on simple flutes, and the quiet hum of a community gathering to eat. The Nile has provided once again, not just in grains and greens, but in flavors that bring people together. You lean back, full and content, watching the last streaks of sunlight fade over the river. Tomorrow, you'll return to the fields and the gardens, but tonight, you feast. The fish that wriggled in your net this morning now rests contentedly in your belly, seasoned and shared among friends. As night deepens, torches flicker, casting warm light over the gathering. Someone hums a slow tune. You close your eyes, listening to the river in the distance. It's more than just a waterway. It's life, flavor, and a shared bond that stretches back thousands of years. With the harvest behind you, the bread baked, and the fish and fowl enjoyed, the rhythm of daily work shifts towards something quieter but just as essential: preservation. Food in ancient Egypt didn't simply vanish when it was cooked or gathered. Winter, drought, or a bad flood could strike at any time, and families relied on careful storage and subtle tricks to keep their staples edible for months. You start your day early, as usual, moving through the village with baskets and jars. The air is crisp and carries the faint scent of mud and river silt. First, you check the granaries, those towering mud brick silos that hold the kingdom's bounty. Inside, sacks of barley and wheat sit neatly stacked, each pile pressed carefully to minimize air pockets. The cool interior of the granary is welcome after the rising sun outside, and the silence here feels almost sacred, broken only by the occasional chirp of a sparrow that slipped inside. You run your hands along the sacks, feeling the weight of months of labor, and inspect for signs of pests or damp. Rats, weevils, and other insects are always lurking, and even the smallest breach can ruin weeks of work. You sprinkle sand around the base of each stack, a simple, practical deterrent, and check that the mud seal at the top remains intact. Small things matter. Every grain counts. Next, you turn to dried fish. Catfish, tilapia, and smaller species are now sun-dried on racks or woven mats. You lift one carefully, the skin hard and leathery, and knock gently to test for dryness. Too soft and it risks spoilage. Too brittle and it will crumble. Once satisfied, you carry the fish to a shaded corner, stacking them neatly and covering them with a thin cloth to keep birds away.
Some neighbors swear by sprinkling a little natron or ash on top to further protect against insects. A curious practice, but it seems to work.
Salted meat is rarer, but in wealthier households, small portions of beef, goat, or poultry are preserved this way. You don't have much today, but you've learned to watch how the technique works. Meat rubbed with coarse salt and left in a cool, airy space becomes firmer, drier, and safer to eat over weeks or months. Historians still argue whether this method was common outside temples and elite estates, or whether it remained a luxury for the few. Either way, understanding preservation is survival.
Next, you move to fruits and vegetables. Some vegetables, like onions and garlic, store well when tied into bundles and hung from rafters. Root vegetables, like turnips, can be buried in dry sand in cool corners of the house. Herbs are tied into small bunches and hung upside down to dry, releasing fragrant oils that will flavor soups, bread, and beer long after the season ends. You crush a sprig of coriander, inhaling the warm scent. Even dried, these herbs bring life to simple meals. Fruits demand more attention. Dates, figs, and melons are either dried in the sun or preserved in jars. You carefully slice a few figs, laying them on reed mats to dry evenly. Dates are strung on twine, their sticky flesh clinging to each other, forming a sweet garland. Some fruits are stored in clay jars with tight lids, a method that keeps them safe from air and insects. These jars might later be buried in cool earth for extra protection.
You pause to admire the results. The garden's summer bounty now lives in multiple forms: fresh, dried, or salted. Bread and beer are stored or consumed immediately. Fish is dried or smoked. Vegetables hang, herbs droop delicately, and fruit glimmers in jars or on mats. The seasons themselves are captured in these storage spaces, a tactile, living record of the sun, rain, and river's generosity. Water management is part of preservation too. Some vegetables and grains are soaked in shallow water baths for washing, then left to dry in the sun or shade. Mud brick walls, thick and porous, absorb excess moisture and create a naturally cool environment, protecting against heat and humidity. You marvel at the ingenuity. It's not magic, just careful observation, passed down from countless generations. Even daily staples like bread and beer require attention. Bread is often baked in small batches, consumed fresh, and sometimes dried for long-term storage. Hard, sun-baked loaves can last for weeks. Beer, on the other hand, is sometimes left to ferment longer in clay jars with narrow necks, reducing spoilage while producing a slightly stronger, tangier drink. It's a delicate balance. Too long, and the beer becomes sour. Too short, and it may not last. Preservation also extends to social practices. Families trade excess grains, fruits, or dried fish with neighbors. Someone with too many onions might swap them for beans, ensuring variety and minimizing waste. Temple granaries often acted as communal reserves, where stored food could be accessed during lean months. These networks are part of the invisible system that sustains a society reliant on seasonal cycles.
And then there are the quirky, personal touches. One neighbor swears that whispering a blessing over a jar of dates keeps the flies away. Another insists that hanging a bit of red linen over a basket of dried figs wards off evil spirits. Whether superstition or clever observation, these small rituals are as much a part of preservation as salt, sun, and air. By late afternoon, you sit amid jars, baskets, and bundles, enjoying the soft glow of the sun filtering through the garden. Each container represents weeks of careful labor, hours of watching the river, and countless small decisions. The air smells of dried herbs, sun-warmed earth, and a faint tang of fish. You sip some water from a clay jar and let your hands rest on the bundles of barley and wheat. In these moments, you understand the subtle power of time in preservation. Grain stored properly will feed the village during lean months. Dried fruits and salted fish will keep hunger at bay. Bread and beer will sustain workers and priests alike.
It's not the excitement of harvest or the thrill of the river, but it's equally vital. The survival of a family, even a kingdom, depends on these quiet, careful practices. You take a deep breath, feeling the rhythm of the land and seasons, the pulse of life preserved in clay, reed, and mud brick. The labor is endless, but it is also grounding, comforting. Each jar and bundle is a small victory against the unpredictability of nature, a testament to the patience and wisdom passed down through generations. As dusk falls, shadows stretch long across the courtyard. You step back, hands dusty and muscles tired, and watch the jars and baskets glow in the fading light. The world feels balanced, harmonious, and alive in a way that only careful preservation can create. Tomorrow will bring new tasks, new challenges, and perhaps new surprises. But tonight, the bounty of the season rests safely in your care. With preservation in place and the daily rhythm of bread, beer, and garden work established, the calendar begins to turn toward another aspect of life in ancient Egypt: festivals. They are not just breaks from labor. They are celebrations of the land, the river, and the gods who make everything possible. And of course, they revolve around food, the bounty of your fields and gardens made sacred, shared, and savored. The morning is soft, the sun still low in the sky, and the sense of anticipation hangs over the village. People are busy, not with plowing or harvesting, but with preparation. Dough is needed for special festival loaves. Beer is brewed in larger quantities than usual, and tables and mats are arranged for communal feasts. Children run ahead, carrying reed baskets filled with fresh figs and dates, their laughter mingling with the low chatter of adults. You step into the courtyard and immediately notice the difference. Normally, the air smells of routine: fresh bread, sun-warmed fish, and herbs from the garden. Today, it's richer, almost intoxicating, with the layered aroma of sweet bread, spiced stews, and freshly brewed beer. The entire village seems to move with quiet excitement, each person contributing in some way. The main festival of the season centers around Osiris, god of fertility and the afterlife, though there are many others, celebrating Hapi, Hathor, or Renenutet. Offerings of bread, beer, fish, and fruit are prepared for temple rituals. Priests arrive early, draped in linen robes, carrying trays of food to lay at the feet of statues. You watch as a young acolyte carefully places a loaf shaped like a lotus flower on the altar, a symbol of rebirth. Historians still argue whether these offerings were primarily symbolic or actually consumed by the priests afterward, but either way, they imbue the food with divine significance. Meanwhile, in the village, food preparation continues with a joyful intensity. You mix dough for festival bread, rolling it out thicker than usual. Some loaves are decorated with simple geometric patterns, others molded into shapes like animals or symbolic glyphs. The shaping is meticulous because each form carries meaning: fertility, protection, prosperity. A neighbor teases that you've made your bread too elaborate, joking that the gods will need a chisel to eat it. Beer, too, is special for festivals. Larger vats bubble quietly, fermented to perfection, with just enough sweetness to be refreshing after a morning of work. You pour it into small clay jugs and cups, making sure to leave enough for everyday consumption as well. Children are often given watered-down versions, while adults sip the full-strength brew. Occasionally, a cheeky soul will pour the cloudy liquid over a loaf, creating an impromptu beer bread snack, a practice frowned upon but irresistible to some. Protein plays a key role in festival meals. Fish, caught fresh from the Nile that morning, is roasted over open flames with herbs from the garden: coriander, dill, and a hint of garlic. Ducks and geese are spiced and cooked slowly, their skins crisping over the embers. Some households even manage small amounts of salted meat, a luxury to make the feast feel abundant. Each dish is carefully placed on woven mats, creating a mosaic of color, aroma, and texture. The village gathers as the afternoon sun climbs high.
Mats are spread in courtyards, baskets of bread and jars of beer arranged in easy reach. People sit cross-legged, passing food from hand to hand, sharing stories of past festivals and joking about mishaps during harvest. Children chase each other around the edges, occasionally reaching for a fig or date that has rolled away.
Simple flutes, soft percussion, and even chanting. Someone begins a slow, rhythmic song praising Hapi, and soon everyone joins in, clapping or tapping along. The sound resonates across the Nile plain, carrying over fields and canals, binding the community together. In a sense, the festival is not just about food, it's about harmony, a temporary alignment of human, natural, and divine rhythms. Amid the merriment, you notice small ritual gestures woven into daily life. Some loaves are carefully set aside as offerings to household gods or ancestors. A jug of beer might be poured onto the ground as a libation. Even small touches, like placing a sprig of coriander beside a dish, carry symbolic weight. These gestures are subtle reminders that food is not just sustenance. It's a bridge between the material and spiritual world. You bite into a soft, fragrant loaf, breaking it apart with your fingers. The bread tastes richer than usual, imbued not just with wheat, but with the pear, sweat, and collective energy of the village. A sip of beer follows, smooth and slightly sweet, its flavor deepened by the fermentation process and the warm sun. You glance around at neighbors, friends, and family, all sharing this moment. There's laughter, a bit of teasing, and plenty of contented sighs. For a quirky tidbit, some families add unusual ingredients to festival bread or beer, like dates, figs, or even bits of spiced herbs, to create seasonal flavors. One neighbor swears by sprinkling dried flowers on top of bread before baking, claiming it makes dreams sweeter. Whether this works or not is debatable, but the aroma is undeniably pleasant. The afterward is calm and reflective. Children nap, adults wash the dishes, and the sun begins its slow descent. The air is warm, carrying hints of roasted fish, sweet dates, and the fading tang of beer. You sit quietly for a moment, absorbing the scene. Festivals aren't just about food. They're a reminder of abundance, community, and continuity. They punctuate the year with moments of shared gratitude, connecting ordinary life to the eternal cycles of the Nile and the gods. As twilight falls, torches are lit, casting soft, flickering shadows across the courtyard. Conversations slow, and the village settles into a relaxed hum. Even the ducks and geese seem to pause, as if sensing the shift. You stand, brushing crumbs from your hands, and take a final look at the feast remnants. Baskets of bread, empty clay cups, and a scattering of figs. Every piece tells a story. The effort of months of work, the generosity of neighbors, and the gentle magic of the Nile itself. By nightfall, the courtyard is quiet. The aroma of the day lingers, subtle but comforting. Food has nourished bodies, bonded people, and honored the gods. The festival may end, but its lessons linger. Gratitude, patience, and the joy of sharing are as essential as any grain, fish, or fig. After the festival, life drifts back into its quieter rhythm, but the world of food in ancient Egypt remains rich with subtle complexity. You move beyond the obvious staples of bread, beer, and fish and focus on the aromatic layers that make meals memorable. Herbs, spices, and little culinary secrets that elevate ordinary dishes. It's a slower, gentler labor, almost meditative, perfect for a day when the sun is warm but not yet oppressive. You start in the kitchen garden, kneeling beside low beds where coriander, dill, fenugreek, and mint grow in neat clusters. Each herb is nurtured carefully. Their potency depends on attention, sunlight, and consistent watering. You pinch a few sprigs, rolling them between your fingers to release their essential oils. The air fills with a mixture of earthy, tangy, and slightly sweet scents. These are the flavors that will define your meals in the weeks to come. Coriander is versatile. used both fresh and dried in bread, stews, and even beer. Dill, with its soft fronds, pairs beautifully with fish. Fenugreek adds depth to porridge and stews, while mint provides a cooling accent in soups or with fresh fruit. You think about how a pinch here and a sprig there can transform the simplest dish into something remarkable, almost ceremonial. Next, you examine the spices brought from distant lands: cumin from the east, sesame seeds from the south, and occasionally rare imports like cinnamon. These are not everyday ingredients, but even a small pinch can enliven bread or fish, lending complexity and a touch of luxury. Some households blend them into pastes with garlic and water, using them as marinades or seasoning for roasts. You scoop a teaspoon of cumin seeds, rolling them between your palms to release the aroma. It's heady, almost intoxicating, and you can already imagine it enhancing tonight's fish stew. While the use of herbs and spices is practical, improving flavor, masking spoilage, and enhancing digestibility, there's also a quieter, almost magical layer. Certain plants were believed to hold protective or health-giving properties. Dill and coriander were sometimes sprinkled over meals for longevity. Garlic was consumed to strengthen the body and mind, especially for laborers. Historians still argue whether these practices were primarily medical, symbolic, or a mix of both, but their persistence speaks to the importance of food beyond mere sustenance. You pause to check on a small herb drying rack where bundles of mint and coriander hang upside down. The air around it is fragrant, almost sweet, with the concentrated scent of dried oils. These will flavor meals through the lean months, ensuring that the culinary world of summer remains alive even in the quiet of winter. Some families use woven baskets lined with clay dust to store dried herbs, believing it prolongs freshness. Others sprinkle tiny charms or amulets among the bundles, a charming superstition that blends care with protection. Back in the kitchen, you prepare a simple herb paste: crushed coriander, minced garlic, a pinch of cumin, and a drizzle of honey. The mortar and pestle work rhythmically in your hands, grinding and blending the flavors. You inhale deeply. The scent rises warm and heady, filling the small room. This paste will season fish, enrich bread, or be mixed into stews. It's modest labor, yet it transforms ordinary food into something noteworthy, even celebratory. Spices and herbs also influence beer and bread. Bakers sometimes pressed fennel seeds or sesame on top of loaves before baking, giving the crust a nutty aroma and texture. Brewers occasionally added dates, herbs, or flower petals to the mash, subtly sweetening or flavoring the cloudy liquid. These experiments weren't uniform. Each household had its preferences, quirks, and lucky combinations. You remember one neighbor swearing that adding a sprig of mint to beer during fermentation produced the happiest brew. It's probably a placebo effect, but who cares when it makes everyone smile? Beyond flavor, herbs and spices often preserved food naturally. Dill and coriander oils, for example, could inhibit spoilage in certain dishes. Salt combined with herbs acted as both seasoning and antibacterial agent. You marvel at the ingenuity. Generations of observation and trial distilled into simple, reliable methods. Even the smallest details, rolling garlic cloves under the palm before adding them to a stew, matter. Then there's the element of ritual and presentation. A simple dish of fish seasoned with coriander and cumin might be arranged carefully on a Walden reed tray, garnished with fresh herbs and sliced dates. Children are told to take only small portions first, leaving the more ornate pieces for adults or honored guests. Some families reserve the best herbs for special occasions, almost like a secret ingredient passed down through generations. You imagine future children experimenting with their own blends, adding a pinch of this or that, creating flavors unique to their household. Even in humble homes, meals carry a sense of ceremony. Breaking bread, pouring beer, and sprinkling herbs is more than routine. It is an acknowledgement of the land, the river, and the careful hands that brought food to the table. Spices and herbs are the silent storytellers, weaving narratives of seasons, trade routes, and family traditions into every bite. By afternoon, your work with herbs and spices concludes, but the fragrance lingers, mixing with the smells of drying fish and sun-warmed bread in the courtyard. You step outside, feeling the warmth of the sun on your shoulders, and breathe deeply. The air carries the layered sense of a day well spent. Fresh herbs, roasting fish, baking bread, and the sweet tang of fruit left to ripen. The Nile floods, the planted fields, the harvested grain, the garden, the fish and fowl, and now the herbs and spices. Everything connects. Every scent, flavor, and texture is part of an intricate tapestry of survival, culture, and quiet joy. You reach for a small bunch of mint, rubbing it between your fingers one last time. Its aroma reminds you that life, even in its simplest forms, is rich when observed closely. And somewhere between the mortar, the kitchen hearth, and the shaded garden, you understand that these quiet labors, the careful grinding, the sprinkling, the drying, are not mundane. They are artful acts of care, each one preserving taste, health, and tradition in subtle, enduring ways. With the aromas of herbs and spices still lingering in the air, your attention turns to another vital aspect of Egyptian food life: markets and trade. It's easy to imagine the village as self-sufficient, but the reality is far more dynamic. Even the most diligent household garden can't provide everything. Some ingredients, some luxuries, and even occasional treats must come from beyond your mud brick walls. Today, you step into that bustling, colorful world. The market awakens early, long before the sun reaches its zenith. You walk along packed earth pathways lined with stalls, each shaded by woven mats or scraps of linen. Merchants call out, advertising fresh fish from the Nile, bread still warm from the ovens, and baskets of dates and figs from distant villages. The air is alive with movement, color, and fragrance. Fragrant herbs mingle with the tang of salted fish, the earthy aroma of vegetables, and the occasional sweet perfume of imported spices. You pause at the grain stall, where sacks of wheat and barley are piled high. A friendly merchant lifts a handful of grain, letting a few kernels fall through his fingers. You run your own hands through it, testing for texture and moisture. Grain is heavy and valuable. It's the backbone of both sustenance and currency. In many households, it serves not only as food, but also as a form of trade or tax payment. Historians still argue whether certain grains were primarily for consumption, storage, or barter, but it's clear that mastery of grain management shapes both wealth and survival. Nearby, fish and fowl vendors display their wares on reed mats. Tilapia glints silver in the sun, while ducks and geese shuffle impatiently in shallow containers of water. You haggle softly with a merchant over a small basket of ducks, gesturing toward a cluster of dates you brought as partial payment. Barter is an art form here. Negotiation, good humor, and local knowledge all come into play. Some days you leave the market with more than you expected. Other days, the merchant's stubbornness wins. Either way, the exchange feels like a delicate ritual, balancing generosity, cunning, and tradition. Spices and imported goods are displayed in small, carefully stacked piles. Cumin, coriander, sesame seeds, and occasionally rarer items like cinnamon arrive from distant lands via caravan or riverboat. You admire the richness of color: golden cumin seeds, deep brown cinnamon sticks, and the dark sheen of dates. These goods are not everyday purchases for most households. They are considered treasures, used sparingly in bread, beer, or stews. Sometimes a curious merchant offers a sample, letting you sniff or taste, a subtle reminder of the sensory pleasures tied to trade. The market is more than an economic hub. It's a social center. Women exchange recipes along the rows of vegetables. Children dart between stalls, carrying small coins or barley for trading.
Farmers and fishers recount the morning's catch, while merchants boast of rare items recently arrived from Upper Egypt or distant oases. You overhear someone joke about a goose so large it could feed an entire family for 3 days. Laughter rippled across the stall, mingling with the calls of hawkers.
Dried herbs and medicinal plants. The seller's table is layered with small bundles of fennel, coriander, and mint, alongside more exotic items like myrrh, frankincense, and lotus seeds. Some herbs flavor food, others are brewed into teas or used in rituals. You pick up a tiny bunch of fenugreek, inhaling its nutty scent. Someone whispers that sprinkling fenugreek in bread promotes longevity, though whether it works or not is anyone's guess. Quirky beliefs like this thrive alongside practical knowledge, creating a rich tapestry of daily life. Trade isn't only local. You hear stories of barter with Nubia for incense, with Byblos for cedarwood, and with Punt for exotic spices and resin. Even ordinary villagers might encounter these items as occasional treats, gifted by visiting merchants or pilgrims. These exchanges illustrate a vibrant, interconnected economy, where goods, ideas, and flavors flow along the Nile and across deserts. You stop at a bakery stall, where bread is displayed in neat, steaming piles. Loaves are round, dense, and often flecked with coarse grains or seeds. You buy a few, feeling the heat through your fingers. The smell is irresistible, warm and nutty, and you know it will taste even better when paired with some fish or a fresh herb paste. Bread at the market often has subtle variations depending on the baker. Some are sweeter, others saltier, some infused with herbs, others left plain. It's a small world of choice and nuance. As the sun climbs higher, the market becomes more vibrant. You notice small barter networks. One family trades onions for beans, another swaps figs for fresh fish. These microeconomies are essential. Money in the form of grain or coins exists, but for many, the exchange of goods and favors remains the lifeblood of daily survival. Even a casual conversation about prices, quality, or preparation methods doubles as social bonding, a form of education, storytelling, and negotiation all at once. A quirky tidbit. Some merchants claim that certain fish taste better if caught during specific moon phases. Others swear that bread baked on a particular day will last longer. Whether rooted in superstition or observation, these beliefs add a layer of color and personal narrative to the market experience, making it a lively blend of commerce, culture, and folklore. You leave the market eventually, baskets heavier and spirit lighter. Walking back through the village, you reflect on the intricate web that sustains life here. Fields producing grain, gardens yielding herbs and vegetables, the Nile providing fish, and the market connecting it all. Trade isn't just about survival, it's about community, trust, and shared knowledge. Each item you carry tells a story of someone else's labor, of distant lands, of cultural exchange, and subtle ingenuity. Back at home, you arrange your purchases carefully. Fresh bread joins the loaves baked yesterday, ducks are readied for roasting, herbs are added to the drying rack, and imported spices are tucked away in small clay jars. The cycle of work, trade, preservation, and preparation continues seamlessly, feeding both body and mind. As the day wanes, you sit under the palm fronds near the river, enjoying a slice of fresh bread and watching children chase each other through the streets. You sip some beer, its smoothness tempered by a hint of cumin from the morning's kitchen experiments. Trade, markets, and barter are not only economic activities, they are the arteries that keep the community nourished, connected, and alive. The market may close for the day, but the lessons linger. Patience, negotiation, observation, and a keen appreciation for flavors and textures that often originate far from your own garden or field. In this exchange, both sustenance and culture flow freely, linking households, villages, and the broader world in a continuous dance of survival and delight. As your baskets settle and the market chatter fades from memory, you turn your focus toward another essential dimension of ancient Egyptian food: rituals. Eating and preparing food in Egypt was rarely purely functional. It was imbued with meaning, intertwined with religion, family, and the subtle belief that nourishment connected the living to the gods and even the ancestors. Today, you follow this quieter rhythm, where each bite and every preparation carries weight beyond mere sustenance. The morning is soft, golden light spilling across mud brick walls. You step into the courtyard kitchen where clay pots bubble gently over a low fire. Bread has been kneaded, fish cleaned, and herbs crushed into fragrant pastes. Even as you work, your mind drifts to the rituals surrounding the act of feeding yourself and others. Every meal is an opportunity to honor life and maintain harmony with the divine. Before touching food, some households begin with a small blessing, often whispered or spoken aloud. You pick up a loaf of bread and, almost without thinking, murmur a quiet thanks for the sun, the Nile, the fertile soil, and the hands that sowed, watered, and harvested the grain. These brief moments are tiny, almost imperceptible acts of gratitude, but they are deeply rooted in Egyptian thought. Food is a gift, a living connection to the cycles of the natural world. Fish, caught fresh from the Nile, often undergo a ritual washing before cooking. You rinse each tilapia carefully in the cool river water, imagining it being cleansed not only of mud and scales, but also of unseen impurities. Some households sprinkle a few drops of beer or pour a tiny bit of water from the sacred Nile over the fish before cooking, a practice thought to ensure favor from Hapi, the god of the inundation. Historians still argue whether such rituals were commonplace among ordinary households or reserved primarily for priests and temple workers, but evidence suggests a surprising degree of everyday participation. You move to the preparation of bread and beer, two staples that dominate Egyptian tables and rituals alike. Bread is shaped carefully, sometimes molded into symbolic forms such as lotus flowers or small animals, and left to rise in a calm corner. You brush your fingers over the dough, noting the warmth and pliability. Beer, meanwhile, ferments in clay jars, its sweet tang slowly developing. Some families leave a small portion as an offering, poured onto the ground or placed on a miniature altar to honor the gods or ancestors. The herbs and spices prepared yesterday take on renewed significance. A sprinkle of coriander over roasted fish is more than flavor. It is a subtle ritual, a gesture that sanctifies the meal. Mint leaves might be added to a dish not just for taste, but for balance, harmony, and well-being. Even the act of grinding herbs with a mortar and pestle is rhythmic, meditative, and quietly ceremonial. The process itself feels like prayer in motion. Pause for a quirky household ritual. Some families insist that cutting fish while facing east ensures the favor of the rising sun, while others whisper blessings over the fire to keep food safe from spoilage. Perhaps it is superstition, perhaps not, but in either case, it infuses the mundane act of cooking with purpose. These small rituals form the backbone of daily life, bridging the spiritual and material worlds. The courtyard fills with the scents of the day: roasted duck, simmering fish stew, fresh bread, and drying herbs. You arrange the dishes carefully on woven mats, mindful that presentation carries symbolic weight. Certain foods are placed in specific patterns, aligning with household gods, ancestors, or seasonal cycles. Children gather, eager but attentive, learning the quiet lessons embedded in the simple act of eating. Communal dining itself is ritualized. Families and neighbors share meals seated cross-legged, passing bread and stew from hand to hand. The order of serving, who eats first, and who receives the best cuts are all influenced by tradition and etiquette. These conventions might seem minor, but they reinforce social bonds and respect for hierarchy, hospitality, and harmony.
Eating becomes an act of community, a daily affirmation of belonging and continuity.
Some meals also feature sacred offerings, prepared and set aside before the family eats. Small portions of bread, beer, and fruit might be placed on an altar or in a niche for the ka, the spiritual essence of ancestors. These offerings are believed to nourish spirits, ensuring protection and favor. Even if the items are later consumed by living family members, the symbolic act remains powerful, a reminder of connection across generations.
You slice open a fresh fig and sprinkle a pinch of crushed coriander over roasted tilapia. The fragrance rises, subtle yet evocative, filling the courtyard. Children reach for bread, dipping it into soft herb sauces. You sip a small amount of beer, letting its gentle fizz and warmth settle in your chest. In this quiet interlude, the boundaries between preparation, nourishment, and ritual blur. Every gesture, every flavor, every aroma becomes an act of attention, care, and reverence.
For a mainstream historical fact, it is well documented that daily meals in ancient Egypt often incorporated ritualistic elements. Offerings to gods and ancestors, symbolic bread shapes, and careful attention to the use of herbs and spices. These practices were as practical as they were spiritual, reinforcing social cohesion and cultural continuity. By midday, the courtyard is calm. Sunlight filters through palm fronds, glinting off clay pots and reed baskets. The subtle symphony of cooking sounds, the soft bubbling of stew, the scraping of mortar against pestle, the faint crunch of drying fish, creates a meditative rhythm. You lean back, taking it all in, aware that rituals of nourishment extend beyond the act of eating. They are about mindfulness, care, connection, and respect for the cycles of life and the gifts of the Nile. And as the day wanes, the courtyard empties slowly. You leave offerings in place, clean your tools, and take a quiet moment to reflect. In ancient Egypt, food was never just food. It was a story, a prayer, a bridge between generations, a celebration of life's abundance, and a practice of gratitude woven seamlessly into daily existence. With the sun dipping toward the horizon, you take a moment to pause and consider the rhythm of life that surrounds food in ancient Egypt. From the first seeds sown in the fertile banks of the Nile to the carefully prepared meals shared in bustling courtyards, food is woven into every aspect of daily existence. You stretch your arms, feeling the lingering warmth of the day, and take in the subtle harmony of labor, nourishment, and reflection. The village itself hums quietly in the late afternoon. Children play near the riverbank, occasionally skipping stones into the water or chasing one another through the reeds. Ducks wander lazily, eyeing scraps of bread left near the kitchen. The scent of roasting fish mingles with the gentle tang of dried herbs, while bread cools on mats spread across the courtyard. Every sound, every smell carries a story, a memory of work, care, and connection. You think back to the field and gardens where grain swayed in the breeze and vegetables ripened under the sun. The Nile provided not only water, but also life itself, shaping the land, the crops, and the rhythm of labor. Farmers worked in measured, deliberate motions, guided by generations of observation. Their days were long, their work often tiring, but there was a quiet joy in knowing that the food they grew would sustain families, neighbors, and even the broader community. Historians still argue whether such systems of labor were strictly organized by state oversight or arose more organically within local villages, but the interdependence is clear. In the garden, herbs and spices held a different kind of fascination. Their cultivation required patience and attention, but their rewards were profound. Aromas that enlivened bread and stew, flavors that transformed ordinary fish into a feast, and subtle gestures that connected the material to the spiritual. You recall the mortar and pestle, the careful blending of coriander, dill, and fenugreek, and the occasional pinch of a more exotic spice like cinnamon or sesame. These small acts are meditative, grounding, and deeply satisfying, reminding you that even the smallest details of food preparation carry meaning. Markets and trade brought another dimension to daily life. Baskets of fresh fish, loaves of bread, dried fruits, and exotic spices created a web of connection, linking villages along the Nile and distant lands beyond. You remember haggling softly with merchants, tasting new flavors, and observing the rituals of barter. The market was not only a place to acquire goods, it was a space for learning, sharing stories, and strengthening communal bonds. Even a simple trade of onions for beans carried lessons in negotiation, patience, and trust. And then there were the festivals, punctuating the year with communal feasts, songs, and dances. Bread shaped like lotus flowers, roasted ducks, and freshly brewed beer were not merely consumed, they were celebrated. These gatherings reinforced social harmony and gratitude for the land's bounty. You recall how children learned to respect the order of serving, how elders offered small blessings over each dish, and how laughter echoed across courtyards, merging with the steady pulse of the Nile. Yet the quiet moments between these events are just as meaningful. Preservation of food, drying fish, storing grain, hanging herbs ensured survival and continuity. The gentle care required for these tasks instilled discipline and mindfulness. You pause to consider how the cycle of planting, harvesting, cooking, and preserving forms a rhythm that sustains not only the body but also the spirit. As twilight deepens, the air cools, carrying the soft scent of herbs and the faint tang of the Nile. You sit beneath the palm fronds, listening to the gentle rustle of reeds and the distant murmur of the river. The day's work has ended, but the connection to the land and to food endures. You sip a small amount of beer, savoring its warmth and complexity, letting the flavor settle and calm your mind. For a quirky tidbit, some families whispered that talking gently to stored grains or sprinkling a little water over dried figs at dusk kept them happy and fresh. Perhaps it was superstition, or perhaps it was simply an act that fostered attention and care. Either way, these small rituals are emblematic of the intimate relationship Egyptians had with their food. You reflect on the importance of mindfulness in daily routines. From sowing seeds to preparing feasts, the care and intention infused into each act of nourishment are profound. Even the simplest meals, a slice of bread, a handful of dates, a small piece of roasted fish, carry layers of observation, labor, and love. These quiet acts, repeated daily, are what sustain families and communities. Now, as night falls, the courtyard grows hushed. Children rest, animals settle, and the last glow of the sun casts long shadows across mud brick walls. You take a deep breath, feeling the fullness of the day, the rhythm of labor, and the satisfaction of meals prepared with care. Food in ancient Egypt is never merely sustenance. It is connection, ritual, craft, and celebration, binding people to the land, to each other, and to the cycle of life. The stars begin to emerge, shimmering faintly over the Nile. You imagine the river at night, calm and reflective, carrying stories of countless meals, countless hands, and countless years of care. And as you settle under the palm fronds, feeling the soft breeze, you realize that this quiet cycle of daily life, anchored in food and nourishment, is one of the gentlest yet most profound ways to know the world. The night is soft now. The air cools and carries the faint, lingering aromas of bread, roasted fish, and dried herbs. You recline beneath the palm fronds, letting your muscles relax and your mind drift with the gentle rhythm of the Nile. The village around you is still. Children sleep, animals rest, and even the last flickers of cooking fires fade into quiet embers. In these moments, the labor of the day feels like a soft pulse in the background of life. Grain stores safely in silos, fish and fowl have nourished bodies, and herbs hang gently, preserving flavor and memory. The rituals, the markets, the festivals, all the rhythms of nourishment settle quietly into the night, like a lullaby sung by the land itself. You breathe slowly, noticing the texture of the cool air, the distant murmur of water, and the soft scent of river mud and sun-warmed clay. There is comfort here in repetition, in the knowledge that each seed, loaf, and herb contributes to a continuous, enduring cycle. You feel connected to the people who tilled the fields, caught the fish, and tended the gardens, and to generations who will follow, observing the same rhythms. Allow your mind to drift gently with the river's flow, letting the day's sights, scents, and stories dissolve into calm. There is nothing urgent now, only the soft continuity of life, the quiet hum of nourishment, and the gentle assurance that the world continues in steady, thoughtful rhythm. Rest here, knowing that you are part of this cycle, and let the soft, slow pace of ancient Egypt's food and life carry you toward dreams that are warm, calm, and full of gentle wonder. End of script. Sweet dreams.